guys, Morgan the Rebellious Reviewer. We talk about music, books, and movies. And today, we're gonna be doing part 2 in my An Album a Day series. So, I already explained how this worked in yesterday's video, so I'll just keep it short. Basically, I'm just gonna use a genre table based on Pokemon types that I found on Rate Your Music, and also a random number generator and a random Pokemon generator. Once I've got a genre picked out, I'm gonna have my 6 Dragon imaginary friends review it using me voice acting. Today's Pokemon is Gigalith, which is a rock type, and the genre in question is garage rock. So, the album we decided to go with is Funhouse by the Stooges, aka Iggy and the Stooges. And before we get started with the voice acting, let me just give my brief thoughts on this particular album. It's really good, and I like how it starts off as a pretty typical garage rock album, and then gets more and more experimental as the album progresses. Like, seriously, it feels like a descent into madness, most likely drug-induced madness if these lyrics are any indicator. The first few tracks are a lot of fun, but then it just gets more and more interesting and unique while still rocking pretty hard. With that out of the way, let's get started with the voice acting. Hey guys, Draven Onyx here, and this is Blaze Flarington, Bolt Thunderstone, Skyler Wing, Houdini Presto, and Forrest Woods. Today we're doing part 2 in our Album a Day series. It was my turn to pick, and the genre I had to pick from was garage rock, which is a good thing because while I'm not overly familiar with garage rock, I like what I've heard. There were a few albums I was considering for this, but I ultimately chose Funhouse by the Stooges, because Skyler, Forrest, and Houdini had never heard it before, even though it's a classic of both garage rock and proto-punk. I said to myself, how could they not have heard this album? This must be remedied. Anyway, as you can probably guess by my reason for picking it, I love this album. It came out in 1970, a year when the hippie movement was still barely holding on, but it's dark enough to put Black Sabbath's Paranoid from this same year to shame. It doesn't start out sounding that dark, with a couple of fun garage rock songs at the start to ease you in. Then it gets gradually darker with more experimental music and more unhinged stuff, until you get to the last track, which is just Iggy Pop screaming while a progenitor to noise rock plays behind him. A lot of people hate the last track, but I find it to be one of the more compelling tracks on this album, and one of the most compelling tracks of all time, because it's so unhinged. This, along with Black Sabbath's self-titled, is the perfect album to symbolize the death of the 60s flower power movement. It's dark, drug-fueled, agonized, and basically a punk album in the wrong year. 10 out of 10. This album is fantastic. Bolt, would you like to go next before I risk having this album ripped to shreds by the others? Wow, someone's optimistic, and that someone is not Draven. Anyways, I also really enjoy this album, but not as much as Draven does. The first three tracks are great, banger after banger right there. This doesn't last, however, because Dirt is really slow and boring. I don't see the appeal of that one. Then the album gets back on track with the next two songs, both of which are great experimental rock songs, especially the title track. I'm a third wave ska fan, so naturally, anything with punk elements and horns is gonna appeal to me. As for that last song, wow, that thing was grating. I get the appeal of it, it's experimental and unique, but I'd argue it's a failed experiment. Overall, I wouldn't give this album a 10. It's not a perfect album, but I would give it an 8 out of 10. Now, let's have someone who's new to this album review it. Who wants to go next? I will. Skyler? This album surprised me. I'm not much of a punk fan outside of post-punk and post-hardcore, so I never decided to listen to this album until now. I figured that since I don't like punk, proto-punk would be a less refined version of it, therefore I have no use for it. After listening to Funhouse, however, I must say I enjoyed it for the most part. Sure, the first two tracks are standard garage rock fare that serve only to ease the listener into the more interesting tracks later on. But once TVI starts playing, the album becomes good. The instrumental section on that song is incredible. The next four songs are even better, with extended jam sessions, a surprisingly solid brass section on 1970 and the title track. And I also agree with Draven that this album is the perfect signifier of the downfall of the hippie movement, feeling like an exceptionally bad psychedelic drug trip. I never thought I would enjoy a proto-punk album, but here we are. 8 out of 10. Wow, Skyler. I thought for sure you would hate this album. Me too. Anyway, who wants to go next? Since Houdini and Forrest don't seem to want to go, I will. This is an album I've loved for a long time. There isn't really a track I skip, though I rarely listen to Dirt and LA Blues outside of my full album listens. Like Bolt said, the first three tracks absolutely rock. 1970 and the title track are great examples of experimentation done right. Unfortunately, while I do like Dirt and LA Blues, I feel like Dirt drags a bit in places, and LA Blues, while interesting, is just not something I want to listen to without the context of the album. In other words, I would place my score between Draven's 10 and you guys' 8. 9 out of 10. Houdini, would you like to go now? Actually, I'll go. If that's alright with you, Houdini. That's alright. Good, because the only reason I was stalling is because you guys were giving such glowing reviews that I was waiting for someone to give a bad or mediocre review before I stated my lukewarm feelings on it. However, everyone other than Houdini has given it a glowing review so far, and he's the only one left. So, I decided not to end the video on a lukewarm note. Anyway, this album is nowhere near as great as you guys are making it out to be. I enjoyed Dirt with its psychedelic feel and the title track, which is admittedly great with the horn playing. And 1970 and TVI were solid as well. However, the first two tracks were just mediocre garage rock / hard rock. And LA Blues was one of the most annoying songs ever. I'm no big Black or Butthole Surfers fan, but even I'll admit that they did this sound better than the Stooges. So, yeah, this album is a mixed bag, but I'll say it leans slightly towards the positive. 6 out of 10. Now, Houdini, close us out. What if Houdini's review is even more negative? I didn't even think about that. Seriously? Seriously. Well, you're in luck, Forrest, because I actually like this album. The first 3 tracks are quite fun, though TVI drags on a little too long. I agree with Blaze that Dirt drags on too long, though I do still enjoy the song. And 1970 and the title track are incredible. However, I cannot stand LA Blues. I get that it's experimental and weird, but it still hurts my ears. This album would be a 10 if not for that song. Unfortunately, even though it's a great progenitor to punk and a transitional album between the 60s and 70s, it only gets a 9 out of 10. Wow, you only gave the second best possible score? How could you? Not exactly a bad thing, Houdini. Anyway, I'm glad to see everyone not named Forrest enjoyed this album. Tomorrow will be Houdini's turn to pick. Let's hope the generators are as nice to him as they were to me, and that we don't have a repeat of Blaze getting folk. I'd say that's unlikely given how varied Houdini's musical taste is. Good point. Anyway, let's throw it back to Morgan. And that's my video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. I'm Morgan the Rebellious Reviewer, and I'm out.